Hey everyone, it's Alex the Real Mr. Robinson here. So I already reviewed Superman 2, the theatrical cut, yesterday. Now it's time to move on to the Richard Donner cut, because I do have quite a lot to say in comparison to the two versions. And that's mainly what this review is going to be. It's going to be more of what's different between the two versions and does it work better. Because the plot itself is pretty much the same. General Zod and his crew are free from the Phantom Zone. They head to Earth to try to rule it. And then the relationship between Lois Lane and Clark Kent further develops, especially since she's getting little hints that he could be Superman. It's largely the same story, but the differences that this has from the theatrical cut make it feel like a completely different movie. I mean, as all the advertising said, it's the version of Superman 2 that it was originally intended to be before Richard Donner got booted off. Which I guess I should talk about that little bit of history. Both Superman 1 and 2 were filmed at the same time, and Richard Donner had shot about 75% of the sequel before he was eventually booted off. The story is that he had so many different conflicts with the producers, and also the cost of Superman, the first one, was way too high. It cost $55 million, which I know doesn't seem like a lot of money today, at least for the budget of a superhero movie, but at the time, it was the most expensive movie made, and $55 million back then in 1978 is a little bit over $200 million today. Compare that to Star Wars with its $11 million budget. Today, that budget would have been around $44 million. So the original Star Wars actually cost a lot less than the first Superman movie. Something to wrap your mind around. But anyway, they kicked Richard Donner off the sequel and replaced him with Richard Lester, who'd mainly done a lot of Beatles movies, like A Hard Day's Night and Help. So he was brought in to basically finish the movie. However, in order to get a full directing credit, or solo directing credit, he had to redo a lot of the movie. So he reshot a lot of the film, and then it eventually got released in 1980 and became the Superman movie that we know and love. Then in 2006, Superman Returns came out, which I'll review in a couple of weeks, and reused some old lost footage of Marlon Brando as Jor-El. And once that footage was discovered, that pretty much gave Richard Donner the clearance to find all the footage that he shot for Superman 2 that wasn't used in the theatrical cut to re-edit the movie as it was intentionally planned to be, and thus the Richard Donner cut was born. And in a lot of ways, this version is actually better than the theatrical cut. As I said, the plot's very different, but there are a lot of different scenarios that happen to where it almost feels like a different movie. For example, in the theatrical cut, you could estimate that it takes place a few years after the events of the first Superman. This movie takes place a couple days after the first Superman movie, and instead of the bomb in Paris blowing up the Phantom Zone and releasing Zod and his crew, it's one of the nukes that Superman threw into space that just so happened to hit General Zod's crew in the Phantom Zone. One noticeably major difference in this movie involves Lois Lane starting to realize that Clark Kent might actually be Superman. It's a scene that takes place after the traditionally ass-numbingly long credit sequence that's a tradition for all Superman movies, where Lois sees her story in the paper about how Superman saved the world in the previous movie. And then she sees Clark Kent walk into the building, and she looks at the picture of Superman in the paper and then Clark Kent, and then she starts drawing glasses, a hat, and a suit on Superman, and then starts to really piece together that they might be the same person. It makes Lois a much smarter character here, and it makes more sense that she would learn it this early, because if you were to go by the timeline of the Richard Donner cut, this movie takes place about a few days after the theatrical cut, so Lois Lane and Clark Kent still kind of are new to each other. They still only know each other for a few days. It's not like in the theatrical cut where you go, you've worked with this guy for years and you're only now starting to realize that he might be Superman. So this change makes Lois a little smarter, even though she immediately follows that intelligence with jumping out of the window of the Daily Planet to try to prove that Clark Kent is Superman. And so when that happens, Clark Kent rushes down to the bottom of the building, blows Lois in the air, phrasing, to basically slow down her descent. And then he releases a giant tarp from the building's entrance. She lands on the tarp and then bounces into a giant fruit stand as Clark Kent rushes back up to the Daily Planet floor, looks down and goes, "Lois, what have you done?" And it's a scene that parallels the scene in Superman 2 where they're in Niagara Falls and Lois Lane throws herself into the river to try to prove that Clark Kent is Superman, and it plays out the exact same way. Except this scene in the Richard Donner cut puts her life more at risk, and it's just a little more exciting. It gets right to the point immediately, which is another benefit of this movie, is that it's a tighter movie. The pacing is a little better, and it moves incredibly fast. The theatrical version of Superman 2 was never boring to me at all, but you could definitely tell that it felt longer for Lois Lane to realize that Clark Kent is Superman rather than here. And that's another big difference in scenes. The scene where Clark Kent finally comes clean that he's Superman is drastically different in this version. In the theatrical cut, Clark Kent burns his hands. Lois is trying to basically help him or fix him, but she realizes that his hand's not burnt, so that's a dead giveaway that Clark Kent was Superman. In this version, Lois is just direct to the point and goes, okay, I know you're Superman, so I'm going to point this gun at you. You're going to have to get up eventually because you are the Man of Steel, so there's no escaping this. She pulls out a gun, shoots Clark Kent, and he doesn't fall over, so he eventually has to take off the glasses, come clean, and go, you realize that if you were wrong, Clark Kent would have been dead. And my favorite part is after that statement, Lois pulls up the gun again and says, with a blank? And what kills me is that after she reveals to Superman that they were blanks, he just has this look of, fuck. He just got duped by Lois Lane, and now his secret's out, at least just for her. And she just smiles and says, gotcha. So all of these scenes makes the Lois Lane, Clark Kent, Superman relationship a little better and more fun to watch. And what I also really love is that in the theatrical cut, Lois Lane is not at all excited about the idea of them posing as a married couple in Niagara Falls. In this movie, she's the complete opposite. She is all down for posing as a married couple just because it's at the point where she's starting to suspect that Clark Kent is Superman. And also the scene when Lois takes Clark Kent's glasses off. In the theatrical cut, that's her first cue that both guys could be the same person. Whereas in the Richard Donner cut, it's sort of there as more of a confirmation that this guy is Superman. And Clark Kent is never around when Superman's around, so ding, 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 they're the same guy. One really noticeable thing is the appearance of Marlon Brando in this movie. There was a lot of footage filmed for Superman 2 involving Marlon Brando that eventually was never used in the theatrical cut, and he was pretty much replaced in the theatrical cut by the actress who plays Superman's biological mother, who, like Brando, cannot say Krypton correctly. So once that footage of Marlon Brando was discovered and used in Superman Returns, the footage that was shot for Superman 2 originally was used in the Richard Donner cut, and it works well. Once again, Marlon Brando does have strong screen presence, great charisma, and he even manages to say Kryptonian correctly. Once, but he still said it correctly. So it's a neat thing to have. Another thing that's really cool here is the music. The score is great, but at the same time, it's kind of non-existent. A lot of the music here is stock music from Superman 1 by John Williams. And then there's some parts of it that are unreleased tracks from Superman 1. The reason is because Richard Donner wanted John Williams to come in and compose a new score for his cut of Superman 2, which Bryan Singer asked the exact same thing for John Williams to come in and score Superman Returns. And I would have loved to hear a new John Williams score for a Superman movie. Unfortunately, he wasn't available to do it because he was too busy with a little movie called Star Wars Episode 3. And that just ultimately proves that John Williams will not score your movie if two other things are a major priority: Steven Spielberg and Star Wars. Sure, it's a rehashed score, but you know what? I'm always into listening to John Williams music, and his sound always continues to fit the spirit of Superman. And it's great. I love it. There are a few little differences that I do like. One of them is there's no fight in the Fortress of Solitude near the end of the movie when General Zod and his crew track down Superman and the Fortress of Solitude. In the theatrical cut, there was a little fight that happened before Lois's life was put at risk. Plus, there's that really goofy moment in the theatrical cut where Superman grabs the S off of his costume and basically flings it at one of Zod's crew members like it's a net or something. It's bizarre, but I do like how in this movie that there's no fight scene because we already had a giant fight scene in the middle of the city already. So having no fight scene in the Fortress of Solitude is nice. And again, it makes the pacing quicker because you're not really bullshitting around with another fight scene. Which I guess I should talk about Superman killing General Zod in both cuts of this movie, because one of the biggest criticisms in Man of Steel was that Superman killed General Zod. And to be honest, in Man of Steel, I didn't have a problem with Superman killing Zod. My problem with that scene comes with everything that's around the killing. The fact that Superman had several other different methods to try to stop Zod. They could have flown away. The family that Zod was about to kill could easily run away. And the idea of the death of General Zod being followed directly by a comedic note where Superman takes out a satellite is kind of bullshit, because it's just a complete drastic change of tone. So the actual neck snapping, I don't have much of a problem with. And I just didn't really care if Superman killed Zod in this movie or not. It's just kind of like, okay, well, they already stated that General Zod is a monster in this series, so why should he still be around? Especially since he and each of his crew members has the exact same level of godlike power that Superman does. So it's probably for the best that they're gone. However, this movie does bring General Zod and his crew back to life. And unfortunately, it results in my biggest problem with the movie. For all the shit that people give about the mind-erasing kiss in the theatrical cut, the ending to Superman 2, the Richard Donner cut, is the exact same fucking ending as in Superman 1, where he spins the world backwards, back in time to where everything's kind of reset. Obviously, with spinning the world backwards, you're going to ask a lot of questions, so I'm just going to bypass that. But what kills me is Richard Donner apparently had no original ideas on how to end the movie, so he just repeated the worst thing about the first Superman movie. And on top of that, in the first Superman movie, he just spin the Earth backwards by a few hours so that Lois Lane could still be alive and California was not in shambles. In this cut of Superman 2, he spins the world backwards all the way to the beginning of this movie. So once it's all said and done, you go, well, why did we sit through this whole movie if you were gonna just reset everything and end the movie back where it started? You feel like you wasted your time watching this movie. And you know what? I just like the mind-erasing kiss better because it's more touching, it's a little more tragic and heartfelt. And in this ending, it just feels like there was never any emotional stakes at all, because at least in the theatrical cut, only Lois's memory is wiped. Everyone else still kind of went on about their day. Now, the only thing, and this is me delving into fan theory territory, that I can think of that would excuse this ending is if the theatrical cut of Superman 2 took place directly after the Richard Donner cut. And then we got to see the entire series of events over again in the theatrical cut. So that's the only thing I could say in defense of that ending. Shit, now that I mention it. Both endings in both cuts of Superman 2 do have that ending where he goes back to the diner and takes care of that one jackass. So shit, that fan theory can't work. I don't know. The Richard Donner cut, in the end, has a lot of improvements over the theatrical cut. In a lot of ways, I think it makes it better than the theatrical cut, but I'm going to give it the same rating that I gave the theatrical cut, which is worth seeing in your lifetime. Because of that ending, I can't quite give it, get off your ass and go see it right now. If Richard Donner had found another way to end this movie, or if the mind-erasing kiss was Richard Donner's idea to begin with, so he could use it in his cut, then I probably would say get off your ass and go see this version right now. But as it stands, it's still the same rating as Superman 2. Still the best Superman movie and the best version of Superman 2, but that ending. And that's my review for the Richard Donner cut of Superman 2. And I gotta say, watching both cuts of Superman 2 and doing all this research on how both these movies came to be, I think we need to be a little more open-minded about the upcoming Han Solo movie, because there was that controversy of Phil Lord and Chris Miller being fired from it after weeks and weeks and months of filming it, and then they were replaced by Ron Howard. For everyone that's still a little skeptical, and yeah, it could easily be bad, look at what happened with Superman 2. Superman 2 ended up being the best Superman movie ever. I'm not going to say this new Han Solo movie is going to be the best Star Wars movie ever, but if Superman 2 made it out okay, then let's keep an open mind with Han Solo. Thank you guys for watching my reviews for both cuts of Superman 2. Now it's time to move forward, or I guess backwards, with Superman 3. I am not looking forward to seeing this one, because this is the only Superman movie that I have not seen, so this is going to be fun. So, until next week, I hope you enjoyed this review. Leave a comment down below and tell me what your thoughts are on the Richard Donner cut of Superman 2. Which version is your favorite, the Donner one or the Lester one? And as always, this is the real Mr. Robinson telling you, there's only one.